Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. It's Charlene Lee, and today I'm going to be talking about how do you create a 90-day plan. So I'm a little bit nervous about this because, first of all, creating a 90-day plan for your generative AI strategy sounds a bit crazy. And also, I'll be very honest, no one has actually done this. They've done different pieces of this 90-day plan in our research, but they haven't actually done this in 90 days. So I'm putting this out there, first of all, as a thought experiment. And I would love to get your feedback on whether this is feasible or not. If you see this is something you could do inside your organization, but also, what am I missing? What are the things that you have done in your exploration of creating a generative AI strategy? What have you done? And what does the process look like? Who did you involve? How did you go about creating this plan? And I would love for you to share, of course, say hello, where you're coming from, but also just how are you approaching the whole question of creating a generative AI strategy? And in some ways, when I talk to organizations and their leaders, the idea, the simple idea of even creating a strategy seems so far fetched because the technology keeps changing, the use cases are unclear, the applications are unclear. We still don't quite understand what it does. Our board isn't just, they're asking like really high level questions. So we're at such an early stage. Is this even the right time to have a strategy? And I do believe it's the time, at least to have something written down, some sort of approach that you can then modify, that you can then create some alignment around, but also with the full recognition that you're probably going to have to change it and fairly quickly. This is not the normal way we approach strategy, which is why it is so difficult because usually we think about strategy as something we lay down in place and we have months and years to be able to execute on it. And the idea is you're pretty sure this is where you want to go and you're not going to update it very often. With generative AI, it's just the opposite. We're going to lay down a plan, figure out what we want to do, and we pretty much guarantee that's going to change, but at least it's a direction. And I like to think of strategy as what we will do, what we will focus on, what we will prioritize, and then also the things that we will not. Because when you create that alignment in the organization, then you can focus on getting the right things done. So I would love to hear again from you about how you actually do this and think about how you're going about it. And Jay, I see you have a comment in here. So thank you so much for showing up, Jay from Rockford, Illinois. Great to see you, Jay. And he says that they're looking on how to improve our content creation process. So I love this. It's a very focused idea of what you want to do with the strategy. It's not to boil the ocean, do everything possible, but what do you want to do with this particular area? So thank you so much, Jay, for sharing that. All right, so I do have some slides just to help guide the process. Let me pull up the first one. I'll make it a little bit bigger. And also, just so you know, you can get the slides also. I'm just putting it up there now in the comments at bit.ly, bit.ly/ CLI 90-day plan. So I'll put it in the banner here too as well. First of all, I think there are some guiding principles to think about when you're creating this plan. And the first one is your values, your purpose, your mission as an organization, and your strategy should deeply inform your plan. This is not about starting with use cases. It's not starting with the technology. It's starting with what is already a foundation in your organization. What do we stand for? What are the values we want to protect and project into our generative AI strategy? Especially because generative AI raises so many ethical and responsibility questions about what we will use as this technology. And that's very different than most of the strategies that we're looking at and creating. I'll give you a few examples. I talked to one company and we asked them, how did you come up with your generative AI strategy? And they gave the most beautiful answer. They said, we started with our values. We started with our purpose. And what one of the examples they gave was that during COVID, they decided to hang on to as many people as possible, even though it was going to be costly, it was going to be tough to do this. They didn't necessarily have work for everyone, but they decided as much as possible they would retain their people. And they took that value and extended into generative AI. They said, we may be able to save some costs, but rather than take those savings in terms of cutting people, we're going to find new ways for us to create value with those people. So that's an underlying value that they said was sacrosanct and a principle that they wanted to take into the generative AI strategy. And so there's some key ideas that you can take and have, and it's so important to have those things. The second principle is to focus on progress and not perfection. You may have heard this in the past. I think of it as the 80-20 rule. If you can directionally be in the right phase and go in the right direction, so you know this is probably the right direction, and that is probably not the right direction. Your gut instinct, your knowledge of your strategy, your values, again, informing you about those decisions are going to be a really good starting point. When I've worked with executive teams on their generative AI strategy, I ask them just off the top of your head, what do you think your strategy should focus on? And they go, well, I'm not sure, but probably these things. And that's a great starting point because you, as an executive in the team, as a leader on your team of the organization, have a good idea of where your competitive advantage comes from, where value is created, and you want to double down on those areas. You also know what are the areas that are being challenged? What are those assumptions? So figure out what those big buckets are. We'll talk a little bit more in the process of how to do that, but focus on progress again, not perfection. The other thing is to create alignment by writing it down. And this is really hard because writing it down, making commitments to this is what we're going to do, really puts in place for many leaders, I can't change my mind. And that goes to the fourth principle. Actually, we can change our mind. The plan will change. We know it's going to change as we learn more. As we develop the plan, we know we're going to have to adjust things. So there needs to be a lot of room and capacity for, again, this process, this alignment, writing it down, revising it, coming back and changing it again and again and again. And this it applies not only for the 90-day planning process, but onwards as you are going and executing it. So I'm going to get into this and talk a bit more about how to actually create this plan. And one thing I just want to emphasize, when I've taken this people through this process, at least the planning process, it is really nerve-wracking because, again, this is not something we normally do. When we've done digital transformation, we've been able to think about and have the luxury of time on our side. We could control and understand and put in place the timing for which we want things to happen. The difference with generative AI is it's already happening, and people are starting to use it in your organization, whether you know it or not. I spoke with one organization. I asked, how are you going to put your plan together? And the first thing they said was, well, we're going to do a survey of all of employees to see what the interest level is, what ideas they have on using generative AI. And from there, we develop some use cases and we go onwards. And I said, how long is that survey going to take? He go, about a month. And I said, you probably know already how it's being used. You can already anticipate that people are using it. Do you want to lose a month confirming what you already know? And versus taking what you know soon to be true and starting to take some action on it. So this is, again, that need for being sure, having perfection, being absolutely 100% sure that this is the right direction to go, and in thinking that we have the luxury of time. And the reality is you may not have that much time. Now, as I go through this 90-day plan, I want to put one giant caveat on this, which is you could do this in much shorter amounts of time. You may need a lot more time to get all of this done. But think of this as a week by week sketch of how you could potentially put a plan together. And instead of giving you specific answers to how you have to go about doing the plan, What I've said are these big buckets week by week with the questions that you have to answer. And you can answer those questions from many different directions, depending on where you are on your journey. You could just be absolutely beginning, and you can think that your applications may be very small, your use cases may not be that important or strategic, or you could see this as something that is looming over the organization as a huge opportunity or a huge risk. So the plan is designed to be flexible to answer the questions that are most important to you as an organization. But again, it's just a plan and a process of how to go about doing this. So let's get into the plan itself. All right. So weeks 1 through 4, and I apologize if it's too small to actually see the comments, but I'm going to just go through it so you can actually see week by week. So week 1, I think, again, if you've already done this, you can skip this entire week, but it's to play defense. And this is so important because do you have the basic use policies in place to be able to protect your data, to protect your customer information, protect your people, the copyrights that are really important to your organization? Because if you don't have those basic use policies, get them in place. And it could be as simple as before using these, please check with us. These tools are very powerful. They also bring some risk. These are the things you have to know. You may want to get some basic training in place, off the shelf training about what generative AI is, and have your key people look at those things and be responsible how they use these tools. You may want to decide that you're going to shut the whole thing off and say nobody can use it until we can figure out how we can do this safely. Whatever it is that you need to do in the first week, get a handle on what is the most important things that you have to protect inside your organization and put the use policies in place. Week 2 is establishing those principles that I talked about today, earlier today. What are the missions and the values, your principles that are going to come up as you make your decisions? Because we know that there are ethical questions, responsibility questions about using these tools that are going to come up. There are going to be situations where we have a choice of taking the savings right down to our bottom line or using that to invest in the future. So, how are we going to make these decisions, these really hard decisions, and establish those principles that are going to guide you along this process? Week 3 is to connect back to your strategy. And this is such an important process because what does your strategy tell you today about how you're going to explore things? What are the big buckets you can go after? And also, what is no longer true that you held to be true for your strategy to be successful? What things are impacting that you're going to have to adjust your strategy? So no company that I can think of, no organization worth its while has no strategy. You have an existing strategy. So use that as your starting point. The worst thing you can do is to say, well, what are the things we can do with generative AI? Let's make a whole big long list of all the applications, all the use cases inside our organization and start with that. Instead, again, you don't have the time and the luxury to do that. What does our strategy inform us? What are the big pillars that our strategy stands on that we need to reinforce or to shore up? Let me give you an example. One organization we spoke with in our research for the book talked about how customer experience is the foundation of their competitive advantage. And so they said, if that's the thing that we do, if we're a customer experience company at the core, then how are we going to use generative AI to enhance the customer experience? So the people they put on in week 4, this is Create the AI Council, that approach to the strategy that they're going to focus on customer experience, then said the people who we want to sit on our AI Council are going to be the people who are representative of our line of business, our operations. We also need somebody from our technology team and also from our data privacy team. So a very small council, very functional, that is attuned to working on that key strategic pillar of customer experience and understanding how generative AI is going to support that. So week 3 and 4 is this iterative process of looking at the key points of your strategy and then assembling your core team to be able to take the rest of the process forward. Let me go on to the next 4 weeks after that. And let's see. All right, here we go. Weeks 5 through 8. Week 5, this is where the money meets the road, the rubber meets the road. This is where the most promising applications or use cases inside of those big buckets. So, what are the most promising ones? This is not, again, to develop an exhaustive list, but which ones can we see already really are going to impact our competitive advantage, impact our strategy? And then what are the requirements in 4 areas: people, process, technology, and data? Those 4 areas, again, classic strategy and digital transformation buckets. But what do we need in each of those areas? Week 6 is focused on the feasibility. Do we actually have those people with the skills and the capabilities? Do we have the processes in place? Do we see a way forward to be able to create that process? Do we have the technology and the data to be able to do this? What is the state of state inside the organization to be able to execute on these most promising applications? And then also, how much are these applications going to cost to develop and put in place? How long is it going to take? So, week 6 is all about assessing the feasibility. And then week 7 is when you pull the whole plan together. Based on the feasibility analysis, what are we going to do first, second, and third? And you're starting to think about that 18-month plan. And the reason why I choose 18 months is that it gives you a longer landscape to say, I would love to be able to do this one thing, but there's no way we can do it right now. It's something we could do after we lay some foundational work. But here are some quick wins that we can implement within the first 3 months of our plan. And let's focus on that. We're going to learn so much more that's going to inform us going into the future. So it's really important, I think, to be thinking about an 18-month plan for your generative AI strategy. And some people say, well, that seems really hard because so many things can change over those 18 months. But what definitely will not change probably is your core strategy. Again, if your core strategy is the foundation on which you are building things, that is not going to change. The way you execute generative AI to achieve your competitive advantage and your strategy may change. But again, if you're laying down the foundations in these top 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 5, 6, and 7, about what you will do, what you won't do, at least as a starting point. So then the week 8 is about communicating the plan. Again, this is really nerve-wracking because, well, we're not sure this is the right direction. But you need to start communicating it outside of that small council. Who needs to know about this? How will they be using it in their roles? How will they be creating adding inputs into the strategy planning process in the next phase? Who's going to communicate this? How will this cascade through the organization? So these are all questions you want to ask and be able to answer. I have seen everything from in that week 8 is beyond the small council. They built out a larger council to extend deeply into the organization, but they also were starting to communicate across the organization, again, those guiding principles. This is what our generative AI strategy is going to do, what it's not going to do. This is going to be our initial focus. We're not going to focus on those things. If you have ideas, we invite you to participate. So those are all important areas that we want to be able to do. Okay, so I have a great comment here from Mark Evans. Hey, Mark, good to see you. And Mark has this great question. What are the basic ways we can use generative AI to help us with the 90-day process? How do we use chatbots to help us with weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, stimulate the conversation and debate and generate ideas? Great question, Mark. Yes, all of the above. And the one thing you want to be very careful about, again, is that week 1 thing, which is be careful what you put into the public-based chatbots because you want to use it, but be careful about disclosing key points of your strategy. For example, I would not upload the strategy and say, what's a generative AI strategy that could go against my strategy? So just be smart about this. But I think the tools that are available to be able to help speed up the process is one of the key reasons why we can do this so quickly. You can create dialogues. You can create some initial plans. You can ask what are some of the best practices for addressing and attacking this particular big bucket that we have? What are the options we have? What are the use cases? And you can do so much more of that research and also the summarizing of that to align people to create that plan. And again, I think it's so important to write it down because if it's not written down, then it doesn't exist. And yet, the simple act of writing it down feels like a commitment that we are saying that this is what we're going to do and that you can't change your mind. And so, this is something you have to constantly fight against, which is say, oh, we can change our mind. As we learn more, as we put these things in place, we can adjust and change what the strategy is as long as we have those foundational guidelines that inform us. We have a general travel direction of travel that we're going to go into, and we can adjust how we actually reach our goal. Again, establish our strategy. The path may actually change, but the ways that you pull it together are not. All right, so great, Mark. Thank you so much for asking that question. And again, I just encourage you that if you have any inputs into or questions about how to do this, again, I would love to hear how you are developing your strategy. And also, again, if you want the slides, you can find them here. All right, let me get back into the slides and go on to my last one, which is really the last the last month, the third month, the last 4 weeks. And here it gets a little bit more mungy because I basically break it down into each week you're going to tackle another area. But you could honestly, if you have a built out working groups, you could take all 3 weeks to answer each of these questions with those working groups. So, depending on how you're structuring your generative AI working teams, you could approach these things in different ways. But I basically put it into 3 buckets here of people, process, and then combining technology and data together. So, people, what are the roles that are going to be impacted? How will job descriptions be changing? How will career ladders be impacted? How are you going to have to retain, hire, promote, and review people differently? How is the future of your workforce going to change and adapt? Again, we don't know exactly how that's going to work over 18 months, but we have probably a pretty good idea that if you're going to put these strategies in place, these applications in place, then these roles are going to change in some way. People are going to be impacted. And so have a worked out workforce plan in terms of how that's going to play out. The process really, again, last week I talked about the AI Council and governance. Who loves this? I absolutely love governance because it creates the guardrails that we can then use to go fast. If I can show people what the limits are, then we can show people go all the way up to that limit, go as fast as you can, but we have to have those guardrails and limitations. So, what policies, processes, code of conduct, what's governance is needed, and especially what are the laws and regulations that are changing and how are we going to comply with them, having a point of view on that. And then week 11 is looking at your data and your technology. What is the state of your data? You probably had again, back in weeks 6 and 7, an assessment of what data and technology you have. But this now is really going into detail saying, how are we going to make up for the fact that our data is not in the greatest shape? How true, how clean is it? How much technical debt, data debt are we having to pay off? What partners do we need? And putting together, again, a work plan over the next 18 months of what data is needed, what technology is needed to support the applications you're creating. And then week 12, this is about being able to update the plan, having a plan to update the plan. How are you going to review and update the plan? Who's going to be involved? Who will be approving it? How are we going to communicate these changes? And I strongly recommend that this plan is a rolling 18-month plan. So at the end of the first quarter, you're adding another quarter and you're updating the plan. And so if you update the plan every quarter, you're adjusting it to say, what have we actually accomplished? What have we learned? We're going to adjust the plan and add another quarter at the end. So we have this rolling 18-month plan of how we're going to implement generative AI into the organization. Again, informed by the strategy, supporting and looking at your competitive advantage of shoring it up or identifying threats and risks and challenges that you want to defend against. So that's my whirlwind approach to thinking about a strategy. I would love to hear from you in the comments as we go forward. Please reach out to me. Does this seem feasible? Is this something you could see yourself doing in your organization? Do you need less than 90 days to accomplish this? Do you need more than this? How would you roll this out and adapt it to for your organization? I would love to have conversations with you. You know how to reach me. And I hope this kind of gives you some guiding posts, a bit of a checklist of how to think about what to do first, second, and third. And more than anything else, I hope that you'll go by, and I'm just going to put it up again here. These guiding principles, again, I think they're so important because it's a very different process of creating a strategy with generative AI because so much is unknown. But I'll say this, that if you do not put a strategy in place, if you say it's too early, I'm just going to put it off, then by default, you already have a strategy. You have chosen not to have a strategy, and that is a strategy in of itself. And it's very dangerous because you're leaving to chance what could actually happen. You're leaving to chance the fact that people are using this. They're not clear how they can use it. We know that there are risks associated with this that are very real in terms of your data, privacy laws and regulations. So at a minimum, have a coherent strategy that says we have decided not to do anything because of these reasons. And this is what that looks like. And in the meantime, we're going to be exploring these areas, but we're just not ready. The market doesn't really, our strategy doesn't deem us to have a focus on this right now. We don't have the resources to do it. That in of itself is a strategy, but it's an intentional one that you have chosen. So the 90-day plan is at a minimum what I think you need to have. It could take more than 90 days, it could take less than 90 days, but please put in place a strategy so that you have an approach to generative AI. Yes, so Jay, glad you're finding this to be a good framework. Thank you for the feedback. And again, I look forward to having more discussions with you about this. All right, next week, we're going to be talking about the inevitable. The fact that something that you do with your AI, your generative AI, is not going to go well. And when it does go not well, when it doesn't go as expected, how can you fail gracefully? How do you build into the plans, the applications that you can fail in a way that people can understand, accept, and that you're preparing for that failure, both yourself as a person who's pulling these strategies together, but also for your employees, for your customers, for your partners, or your supply chain. Whoever's being impacted by this generative AI initiative that you're doing, how do you set it up so that you can fail gracefully? So we'll talk about that next week. And in the meantime, please send me your feedback on what you think about this 90-day plan. What adjustments would you recommend that we think about? What did we not address? And again, as always, really appreciate all the time of you spending watching this live stream. And I will see you next week. Take care.